When it happened, it didn't even sound real. I was standing by the kitchen counter, scrolling through my phone with my morning coffee, when an image popped up on my feed: Caleb and Brianna on a beach, barefoot, holding hands, a just married sign swinging in the salt breeze. The caption read, "Only special people were there." At first, I thought it was some kind of pre-wedding shoot. You know, those cute engagement photos everyone posts months before the big day. But then I saw the date. Yesterday. And the ring on her finger wasn't a prop. I called Caleb right away. He picked up after the third ring, voice flat, like he'd been rehearsing. "Mom, it was just something small. You know how Bri is, she wanted it intimate, just the two of us and a few close friends." Close friends. The words hung between us like cold air from an open freezer. I could hear Brianna's laugh in the background, bright, carefree, familiar. She'd spent enough nights in this kitchen, sipping my wine, calling me Mom too. "Just small," he said again. "You'd have been bored anyway." My throat went dry. Bored. That's how my only child described the day I'd been saving for, dreaming about, planning in secret. The night before, I'd laid out a dress navy blue with soft embroidery I'd bought on clearance last spring. I'd even dusted off my husband's old cufflinks, the ones I planned to hand to Caleb on his wedding day. "Something from your father," I'd imagined saying. It turns out that moment belonged to someone else's story. After we hung up, I walked to the entryway, half dazed, half searching for something to hold on to. My eyes landed on the brass hook by the door, the one where I kept the spare keys for Caleb and Brianna's apartment. They'd needed it all the time, for deliveries, for emergencies, for when the landlord was being a pain. I took the key off the hook and turned it over in my hand. It felt heavier than it should have, like it carried every grocery run, every rent transfer, every little rescue I'd done quietly in the background. On impulse, I grabbed my coat and drove across town. When I reached their duplex, I tried the key. It wouldn't turn, not even a wiggle. They'd changed the locks. Through the front window, I could see the glow of fairy lights and that same just married sign propped against the couch I'd helped them buy last winter. For a moment, I just stood there, rain seeping into my shoes, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat drown beneath the wind. That key had opened more than a door. It had opened my wallet, my patience, my sense of worth. And now, standing in the drizzle with a useless piece of brass in my hand, I realized I'd never really been invited in. When I got back home, I hung the key back on the hook. The metal clinked against the wall, a sound sharper than usual. I stared at it until the ring stopped swaying. "Special people," I whispered. I wasn't angry yet, just hollow. The kind of hollow that makes you start rearranging everything in your head, every favor, every check, every, of course, honey. I made a fresh pot of coffee, stronger this time. My hands shook when I poured it. Somewhere in the background, the washing machine buzzed, and I laughed a little because even the appliances in this house knew when to stop giving. That night, before bed, I opened my notebook, the one where I tracked bills and grocery lists, and I wrote one new line across the top. If I wasn't invited to their beginning, what exactly was I funding? The words looked steadier than I felt, but for the first time in a long while, I didn't delete them. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, still half expecting a call that never came. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the wall clock. For years, my mornings had started with a list of things to do for them. Transfer rent, drop off groceries, double check if Caleb's insurance payment cleared. That morning, I sat down at the kitchen table with my coffee and an old spiral-bound notebook. The cover was peeling, but inside were pages of neat little columns, dates, amounts, memos, rent, utilities, emergency dental work, car repair, birthday surprise. My handwriting looked steadier back then, more hopeful. It wasn't just a notebook. It was the green ledger, the one I'd used since my husband died to track the money I gave Caleb and Brianna. I used to joke it made me feel organized, but deep down, it was proof I existed in their lives. Every number was a breadcrumb saying, "See, I'm part of your story too." I ran my finger down the columns and did the math. 3 years of help, 36 rent payments of $500 each, groceries, gas, holidays. A loan I'd never see again. It came to more than $20,000. My throat tightened. I'd spent my quiet years building a safety net for them, while my own retirement account sat untouched, collecting dust. By 8 a.m., I'd poured a second cup of coffee and called Nora. She's my neighbor, sharp, funny, no nonsense. A nurse who's seen enough families fall apart in hospital waiting rooms to know what neglect really looks like. "Come over," I said. "I need to talk." She arrived 10 minutes later, in scrubs and sneakers, smelling faintly of antiseptic and rain. I showed her the green ledger, every line, every transfer. She listened without interrupting, only shaking her head now and then. When I got to the wedding part, the photo, the caption, the key that no longer fit, her eyes darkened. "Oh, honey," she sighed, "that's not a mistake. That's a message." "I just don't get it," I said. "I was there for them, every single time. How could they shut me out like that?" Nora leaned back in her chair. "Because people like Brianna only love on a transaction. Once you stop giving, you stop existing." Her words hit harder than I expected. I wanted to argue, but the truth had already settled in my chest like cold air. That afternoon, I got a text from Brianna. "Rent's due. Did you forget to send it? The landlord's on us." No apology. No mention of the wedding, just a bill. I stared at the message for a full minute. My thumb hovered over the screen, ready to type the usual, "On it, sweetheart." But then I set the phone face down. Let it buzz. Once, twice, then silence. Nora watched me from across the table, eyes steady. "You just did the hardest part," she said. "What part?" "Nothing. You did nothing. And that's huge." We sat there in silence, both watching the phone that refused to stop buzzing. I could almost hear my own pulse in the quiet kitchen. When it finally stopped, I picked up the notebook again. On a fresh page, I wrote 3 words across the top in bold, messy ink. Stop. Record. Wait. It wasn't revenge. It was data. I wanted to see how long it would take before they noticed my silence wasn't an accident. For the first time, I realized I didn't owe them an explanation. If love required a receipt, it wasn't love at all. That evening, I cleaned the house, not the frantic, guest-coming kind of clean, but slow, deliberate movements, dusting the shelves, folding blankets, making space. There's a strange peace that comes from preparing your home like you're expecting yourself to stay a while. Before bed, I walked to the brass hook by the door. The spare key still hung there, dull under the lamplight. I thought about taking it down, but I left it. Not out of sentiment, more as evidence. A relic of how I'd let people into my life without asking if they'd earned the key. I slipped the notebook into a drawer and turned off my phone for the night. The quiet felt strange, but clean, like static clearing after a long storm. As I crawled into bed, the phrase looped in my head like a quiet promise. Stop. Record. Wait. Maybe tomorrow I'd start counting something new, not what I'd spent, but what I'd kept. They came over on a Tuesday afternoon, unannounced, like they always used to, except this time. They weren't carrying takeout or laundry or excuses. They brought a man in a pressed shirt and an attitude that didn't belong in my living room. Caleb started with that gentle, coaxing tone he uses when he's about to sell me something. "Mom, this is Pastor Jake. He's been helping us with some financial planning. We just thought it might be good for you too." Brianna chimed in before I could answer. "Yeah, it's just a temporary setup, more of a safety net, so no one takes advantage of you." When it was tented in with now it's. I looked at the folder in Pastor Jake's hand. Financial management packet, it said in embossed gold letters. Underneath, a tab marked Power of Attorney. For a moment, I just blinked at it, trying to understand how we'd gone from wedding photos I wasn't invited to paperwork about controlling my bank account. Jake smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Mrs. Hart, this is purely standard. You'd still have access to everything, of course. Your son and his wife would just help you manage things while you focus on your well-being." My well-being. Funny how that word can sound like a threat when it comes from the wrong mouth. Caleb nodded, pretending to be calm, but I saw the pulse in his neck. He was nervous. "Mom, you've seemed distracted lately. Missing calls, forgetting things. We just want to help before something serious happens." "Something serious," I repeated quietly. Like what, Caleb? Forgetting your wedding invitation? His eyes flickered. Brianna's lips tightened. Jake shifted in his seat, papers rustling like dry leaves. I'm not signing anything today, I said, keeping my voice even. Mom, it's nothing dramatic, Brianna insisted. You're making this bigger than it is. I looked at her, really looked at her. She had that fixed sweetness that used to fool me, soft voice, careful makeup, polite concern masking calculation. I'd seen that expression before, just before every emergency text or last-minute favor. I appreciate your concern, I said, choosing my words like glass shards. But I don't need a manager. I need a son. That shut them up for a moment. Caleb shifted uncomfortably. Jake leaned forward, trying to fill the silence. Mrs. Hart, I work with many families in this situation. Sometimes older adults feel resistant at first, but… Older adults? I cut in. You mean the people who pay your salary? He coughed, smiled again, didn't answer. Something inside me clicked then, not anger, exactly, but clarity. The kind that comes when you've been lied to one time too many, and your brain finally stops negotiating with your heart. I stood up and walked to the entryway. This conversation is over. I'd like my afternoon back. Brianna let out a fake little laugh. We're just trying to protect you. Then start by respecting me. I reached for the brass hook by the door. 2 spare keys hung there. One for them, one for emergencies. I slid both off the hook and into my pocket. You're not locking us out, are you? Caleb asked, half joking, half pleading. I'm just putting things back where they belong, I said. With me. Take. The man in the pressed shirt opened his mouth to say something, but I didn't give him the chance. I opened the door wide. Good afternoon, Pastor. They hesitated. Then the 3 of them shuffled out, their expensive cologne and cheap apologies trailing behind. The door clicked shut. For the first time in years, I heard my house exhale. I stood there for a long moment, the keys heavy in my hand, my heart beating steady, not soft, not frantic, just sure. I didn't know what would come next. But I did know this. If you ever need to find out who really sees you, tell them no and wait for the silence. That night, the quiet didn't feel peaceful, it felt loaded. Like my house had finally learned how to hold its breath. Every sound was sharper. The hum of the fridge, the creak in the hallway, the way my phone lit up every few minutes with Caleb's name flashing across the screen. I didn't answer any of them. By morning, the missed calls had turned into texts. First polite, then pleading, then guilt-laced. Mom, please. You're overreacting. We were just trying to help. You've always said family sticks together. It's amazing how help starts to sound like control once you stop saying yes. I decided to drive into town to do something normal, something ordinary. I needed to remind myself I still had a life outside their orbit. So I went to the hardware store. The guy behind the counter, Frank, had known me for years. He was the kind of man who remembered details, who'd ask how your garden was doing before ringing up your purchase. Well, if it isn't Mrs. Hart, he said, grinning. What brings you here? Don't tell me Caleb broke another sink. Not this time, I said. I'm changing my locks. He blinked, caught off guard, then nodded slowly. Good move. Want the good ones? The kind you can't copy at the kiosk? Yes, I said. The kind you can't copy at all. While he gathered the boxes, a younger man came out from the back, his son, Miles. He was tall, quiet, the kind of polite that doesn't feel rehearsed. Frank told him I needed a full lock replacement and suggested he come by after his shift to install them. Sure thing, Mrs. Hart, Miles said. You want the deadbolts reinforced too? For a moment, I hesitated. Reinforced sounded excessive, but then I thought of Brianna's smooth voice saying, You're not locking us out, are you? Yes, I said. Reinforce everything. That afternoon, while Miles worked, I made coffee and hovered by the window pretending to read. He was careful, methodical, explaining each step as he went. He didn't treat me like some fragile old woman or a paranoid client, just a person making a smart choice. Family giving you trouble? He asked gently, like he already knew the answer. I smiled faintly. Something like that. My grandma had to do the same thing, he said. My uncle used to come by unannounced, borrowing things. Locks fixed that real quick. It was oddly comforting hearing my situation turned into something almost normal, like I wasn't the only one learning how to close a door and mean it. By the time he finished, the sun was starting to set. The new locks clicked perfectly, crisp and final. I paid him, thanked him, and watched his truck disappear down the road. As the last light faded, I realized I hadn't felt this safe in years. But peace never lasts long when guilt is someone else's weapon. Around 8, there was a knock at the door. Not a gentle one. A pounding. Steady. Demanding. I looked through the peephole. Caleb. Alone. No Brianna, no lawyer, just my son standing in the glow of the porch light, eyes shadowed, face tight. "Mom," he said through the door. "Please, can we just talk?" My hand hovered over the knob. Every part of me wanted to open it out of habit, out of longing, but then I saw the faint outline of papers tucked under his arm. "What's that?" I called through the door. He hesitated. "Just documents. Some things we need to sort out." Documents. Of course. It was never just a visit. It was always something to sign, something to transfer, something to fix that wasn't broken until they touched it. "I'm not opening the door tonight," I said. He stepped closer. "Mom, you're making this harder than it has to be." I almost laughed. "That's funny. That's exactly what I was thinking." There was silence. Then footsteps fading. Then his car pulling away. When the taillights disappeared, I turned the new deadbolt one clean click. Not out of fear this time, but out of ownership. I leaned against the door, listening to the steady tick of the clock and the quiet hum of the house. That brass hook by the entryway gleamed faintly in the lamplight, empty now. No keys left hanging for anyone else. And for the first time, I realized something. Sometimes the smallest sound in the world, the click of a lock, isn't about keeping people out. It's about keeping yourself in. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid, because I was awake in a way I hadn't been for years. Every thought, every memory, every unspoken no I'd swallowed was finally coming up for air. Around 2 in the morning, I made tea and sat by the kitchen window. The neighborhood was still, the street lamps casting long orange shadows across the empty road. I thought about Caleb, my little boy, who used to build Lego castles on this very floor, who once cried when he couldn't find me in the grocery store. When did that child disappear? Or had I simply refused to see the man who replaced him? For years, I told myself I was helping, that every transfer, every check, every late-night rescue was an act of love. But if I was being honest, it wasn't just generosity, it was fear. Fear of losing him. Fear of being unnecessary. Fear that if I stopped giving, I'd stop mattering. That was my secret misbelief, I guess. I thought love had to be proven, documented in dollars and deposits. And in that quiet, I finally saw the cost. I'd spent so long financing affection that I'd forgotten how to receive it freely. The next morning, Nora stopped by with her usual bluntness and 2 blueberry muffins. She didn't ask permission. She just walked in, like always. "You look like someone who's been awake all night making big decisions," she said, eyeing the untouched mug on the counter. I laughed softly. "You could say that." She sat across from me, breaking her muffin in half. "So, what's next? You've changed the locks, blocked their numbers. What are you going to do about the guilt?" "The guilt?" Yeah. That little ghost that keeps whispering you're the bad guy for finally saying no. And with 2 livid ones. I stared into my tea. I thought it would feel freeing, but it feels heavy, like I've betrayed him. Nora nodded. "That's the addiction talking. Not to money, to approval. You've been conditioned to earn your own peace." She was right, of course. It wasn't Caleb's manipulation that scared me most. It was the possibility that he might really leave me alone this time, and I'd have to figure out who I was without him. That afternoon, I did something radical. I cleaned out my files. Every receipt, every temporary loan, every grocery list I'd kept for his emergencies. I stacked them neatly in a blue folder labeled Proof of Love, then crossed it out and wrote Proof of Habit. It felt like a small funeral for all the versions of me that mistook sacrifice for purpose. Later, I walked to the park down the street, the one where Caleb used to chase ducks with breadcrumbs. I sat on the same bench we used to share when he was small. Families passed by. Parents pushing strollers, teenagers with earbuds, laughter floating in the cold air. And for once, I didn't feel envy. I just felt calm. I realized something then. Boundaries aren't walls, they're windows. They let you see who's truly willing to meet you halfway. When I got home, there was a letter in the mailbox with Caleb's handwriting. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. Inside, a single page. "Mom, I'm sorry for yesterday. We were just trying to help. I know you think we're after your money, but that's not fair. We're family. You raised me better than this." It should have softened me, but the apology felt mechanical, like he'd learned the rhythm of remorse without its meaning. There was no mention of Brianna's manipulation, no acknowledgement of the power of attorney papers, just a vague plea for reset. I folded the letter and placed it inside the same blue folder: documentation, not reconciliation. That night, I stood by the bathroom mirror brushing my hair and caught my reflection, familiar but different. My eyes looked clearer, like someone who'd just stopped apologizing for surviving. I whispered the words out loud, just to hear how they sounded. "Love doesn't require proof, and peace doesn't need permission." It wasn't a declaration of war. It was a promise to myself. The next few weeks felt almost normal, at least, my version of normal. I started walking in the mornings again, cooking for myself instead of for someone else, even joined a book club at the library downtown. There was a strange peace in having no one to check in with, no crisis waiting on the other end of my phone. But peace has a way of making some people restless, especially those who mistake your silence for surrender. One afternoon, I came home from the library to find a white envelope wedged under my front door. No stamp, no address, just my name, Evelyn, written in Caleb's handwriting. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. Inside was a letter on fancy stationery, embossed with a law firm's logo. "Dear Mrs. Hart, this is to inform you that your son, Mr. Caleb Hart, and his wife, Mrs. Brianna Hart, have retained our services in order to ensure your financial well-being. Given recent concerns about erratic decision-making and social withdrawal, we are prepared to initiate proceedings to establish a temporary conservatorship pending medical evaluation." It took me 3 tries to finish reading. By the end, my hands were trembling not from fear, but from the cold clarity of betrayal. They weren't just trying to guilt me back into submission, they were going to use the law. I called Nora first. She didn't even let me finish explaining. "Don't talk to them. Don't sign anything. I have a friend, retired attorney. She'll point you in the right direction." The next morning, I sat in a quiet office lined with books and certificates. Across the desk was Diane Brooks' gray hair, steady eyes, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. She listened without interrupting, just taking notes while I told her everything. The rent payments, the wedding I wasn't invited to, the unannounced visit with the pastor and those papers, the locks, the letter. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "Evelyn, what they're attempting is called elder financial abuse, and if they're threatening a conservatorship, they're not just being manipulative, they're escalating. We need to get ahead of this." She pulled out a yellow notepad and began writing steps in neat, legal script. "Document everything: transfers, texts, voicemails, the letter. Secure your assets, new accounts, dual verification, no shared access. Medical proof. Get a capacity evaluation from an independent physician." "Why medical proof?" I asked. "Because their case depends on convincing a court you're incompetent. We'll show you're not. You'll take the tests, on your terms, with your chosen doctor. Then we'll have documentation if they try to push it." Her calm confidence steadied me. I realized I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't alone. When I left her office, the air outside felt sharper, clearer. For the first time, I wasn't reacting, I was preparing. The next few days became a blur of paperwork and strategy. I printed bank records, highlighted transactions, even made a binder labeled "Timeline of Events." Every late-night call, every emotional guilt trip, every emergency transfer, it all went in. And as I did it, something inside me shifted. Each page I filed took a little power back. Each signature that was mine alone felt like a small declaration of independence. That Friday, while I was organizing receipts, my doorbell rang. I checked the camera feed. 2 people stood outside, one holding a clipboard. They looked official. "Good afternoon, ma'am," the woman said through the door when I answered. "I'm from the Department of Social Services. We've received a report suggesting you may be in need of a wellness check." "A wellness check?" My throat went dry. "A report from whom?" "I'm not authorized to disclose that, ma'am." But I already knew. Caleb and Brianna had decided to take their next shot. I didn't open the door. Instead, I smiled, not kindly, but with the calm of someone who had finally stopped playing the wrong game. "You can wait right there," I said. "I'll call my attorney." 5 minutes later, Diane was on speakerphone. Her tone could have sliced glass. "Unless you have a court order, you are not entering my client's property. Any further contact must go through my office. Understood?" The officials hesitated, mumbled something about following procedure, then left. When their car disappeared down the road, I leaned against the wall, heart pounding not from fear this time, but from the rush of standing up for myself and winning. That night, I wrote a new note and taped it inside my kitchen cabinet, right above the coffee mugs. Calm, collect, confirm. It wasn't a slogan. It was survival. Because from that moment on, I knew this wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, and I wasn't giving that up without a fight. It's strange how calm the world looks right before a storm. The next morning, the sky was perfectly clear, the air crisp, and the neighborhood birds sang like they didn't know someone was plotting to take my life apart. Diane called early. "Evelyn, they've officially filed the conservatorship petition," she said. "We'll be served within the week." For a second, I just stared out the window, watching a couple walking their dog down the street. Everything looked normal, mundane, even but inside. It felt like the ground had shifted. "So this is really happening," I said quietly. "Yes," Diane replied. "But we're ready. I want you to keep documenting everything. And Evelyn, don't talk to them directly. Let me handle all communication." I agreed. After we hung up, I sat down with my binder, the one labeled Timeline of Events. It was almost full now. Dates, texts, screenshots, letters. My whole unraveling neatly cataloged in black ink. But instead of dread, I felt something different. A strange, steady kind of strength. That afternoon, I got another unexpected visitor, Miles, the young man who had changed my locks. He was dropping off a receipt for the security installation, but when he saw the pile of folders on my table, he frowned. "You building a case or writing a book?" "Maybe both," I said with a half smile. He laughed softly, then turned serious. "My grandma went through something like this. Her son tried to get control of her pension. She fought back and won. Just don't lose your temper. Paper wins, not yelling. Paper wins, not yelling." It stuck with me. Maybe that was my new religion. The following days were a blur of calls, notarizations, and signed affidavits. Diane arranged for me to meet Dr. Patel, a geriatric psychiatrist, for an independent evaluation. She was sharp, warm, and professional. We spent nearly 2 hours together as she tested my memory, attention, reasoning, even asked me to draw a clock. At the end, she smiled. "Evelyn, you're not just cognitively capable, you're exceptional for your age. Whatever this case is, it's not about your mind." That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. But peace never lasts long when people feel entitled to your surrender. 3 days later, around dusk, I saw Caleb's car slow roll past my house. Then again. And again. The same pattern, every evening. Like a shark circling, waiting for weakness. I started logging the visits with timestamps, photos, notes, everything. When I told Diane, she said, "Good, keep doing it. Every pattern of harassment strengthens our defense." A part of me hated that word defense. It made me feel like I was supposed to be ashamed for protecting myself. On Friday, Nora dropped by with dinner. "You're too calm," she said, spooning stew into a bowl. "You sure you're not bottling this up?" I laughed. "I've been bottling for 35 years, Nora. I think the bottle's finally broken." Everyone, too. That night, as I washed the dishes, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window, soft light, steady eyes. I realized I was no longer the woman who apologized for being in the way. I was someone else now. Someone who finally understood that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes, It's just consistent. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived, the official court summons. Inside, their accusations were laid out in cold, impersonal type. Erratic behavior, paranoia, possible cognitive decline. Attached were 3 witness statements: Brianna, a concerned neighbor, and, unbelievably, the pharmacist I'd known for years. For a moment, my hands shook not from fear, but fury. They'd fabricated a whole narrative to erase my autonomy. That night, I opened my binder and added a new section labeled False Claims. I wasn't going to wait for the courtroom to tell my story. I was going to build my own record. The next morning, I went straight to the pharmacy. Mr. Harris looked startled when I walked in. "Mrs. Hart, did you sign something about me?" I asked quietly. He turned red. "Your daughter-in-law said it was for insurance verification. I didn't know." "It's all right," I said. "But I'll need you to write a new statement. Tell the truth." And he did. Signed, dated, notarized. Another page for the binder, another thread pulled from their web. When I got home, Nora was waiting on the porch with a look that told me she'd heard everything. "You're not just surviving this," she said. "You're turning it into evidence." I smiled faintly. Paper beats noise. That night, as I filed the latest documents, I realized something important. The fear wasn't gone. It never really goes away, but I was learning how to use it, to focus it, to turn panic into proof. And as I slid the binder shut, I whispered to myself, if they want a war, I'll give them one. But it's going to be fought in daylight with ink, not tears. His mustard kit. The hearing was set for a Monday morning, but the days leading up to it felt like slow motion, every minute dragging under the weight of anticipation. I kept my binder close, almost like armor. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was proof of sanity, of truth, of everything they had underestimated in me. The night before court, I barely slept. I walked around the house, touching the walls, the photos, the chipped kitchen counter where Caleb had once done his homework. Memories can be cruel like that. They sneak in wearing nostalgia but leave carrying grief. At dawn, I brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the table. I looked at the words taped inside my cabinet. Calm. Collect. Confirm. My hand rested on the final word longer than the others. Confirm. That's what tomorrow would be about, not proving who I was to them, but confirming who I'd finally become. When Diane arrived to pick me up, she gave me that look, half reassurance, half strategy. Remember, Evelyn, you don't have to perform. You just have to tell the truth. I nodded, clutching my binder. That's the one thing I still own outright. The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and nerves. Caleb and Brianna were already there, sitting with their lawyer, a sleek man with a crocodile smile. Brianna wore black, as if mourning her access to my money. Caleb wouldn't meet my eyes. When the judge entered, everyone stood. His name was Judge Williams, gray hair, steady voice, the kind that didn't bend easily. I liked him immediately. The opposing lawyer went first. He painted a picture of me as a lonely, confused widow, manipulated by predatory influences. He spoke about my sudden hostility, my withdrawal from family, my erratic decisions. I almost laughed. They had turned my healing into pathology. When it was our turn, Diane stood and began with quiet precision. Your Honor, what you're hearing is not a case of mental decline, it's a case of recovered autonomy. Then she started unveiling the receipts. The bank statements, the text messages, the forged witness notes, the evaluation from Dr. Patel. With each document, the air in the courtroom thickened not with drama, but with undeniable fact. Finally, she called me to the stand. I took a deep breath and walked forward, each step a small act of reclamation. Mrs. Hart, Diane began softly, can you tell the court why you stopped financially supporting your son and daughter-in-law? I met the judge's eyes. Because love isn't a payroll, Your Honor. Because I spent 30 years mistaking sacrifice for affection, and when I stopped paying, I realized what was real and what wasn't. A few people in the courtroom shifted in their seats. Even the judge paused before making a note. The opposing lawyer tried to rattle me, but I didn't flinch. Every question he threw was met with calm, measured truth. When he asked if I regretted cutting them off, I said, I regret teaching them they could buy my forgiveness. When it was over, Judge Williams announced he would deliberate privately. The waiting felt eternal. I sat outside on the cold marble bench, hands folded in my lap. Brianna whispered something sharp to Caleb, and for the first time, I didn't feel the old pang of guilt. I felt distance. The kind that comes when you finally stop trying to save people who refuse to swim. After what felt like an hour, the clerk called us back in. The judge looked directly at me as he read the ruling. After reviewing the evidence and testimony, this court finds that Mrs. Evelyn Hart is fully competent to manage her financial and personal affairs. The conservatorship petition is hereby denied. Furthermore, the court recommends that the petitioners seek counseling for issues related to financial dependency. I didn't cry. I just closed my eyes and exhaled. Brianna's face went pale. Caleb looked small, like the child he once was, lost and angry in a world he couldn't control. As they gathered their things, I caught his eye for the first time. He opened his mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to lash out, but I simply shook my head. Not here. Not anymore. Outside, the morning sun was warm against my face. Diane smiled. You did it. I smiled back. No. We documented it. That night, I sat on my porch, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for footsteps, for phone calls, for chaos. Just quiet. Clean, earned quiet. I picked up a pen and wrote in my journal. Freedom doesn't mean nobody can hurt you. It means nobody gets to decide your worth again. And below that, I added one final line. The boundary isn't a wall, it's a mirror. It shows everyone, including me, who I really am now. After the court ruling, I thought everything would just stop. The calls, the letters, the tension that had been hanging in the air for months. I thought winning would mean peace. But what I didn't realize was that peace isn't something you're handed, it's something you build, one quiet boundary at a time. The first week felt surreal. My mornings had a rhythm again, coffee, music, light through the kitchen curtains. For the first time in years, my money stayed in my account past the 15th of the month. I even caught myself humming while balancing my checkbook, like the old days when life was simple and the numbers made sense. Nora came over the following Saturday with a pie and a grin. To freedom, she said, handing me a fork. I laughed. You make it sound like I just got out of prison, she smirked. You did. It just didn't have bars. We ate straight from the dish, talking about everything except Caleb. It felt good not to analyze him, not to worry about what he'd do next. That absence, the one that used to ache, was finally starting to feel like space. A week later, I got a short letter from him. Handwritten this time, no lawyer's stamp, no signature line, just 2 sentences. Mom, I'm sorry. We went too far. I don't know how to fix this. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in my binder. Not under evidence, not under timeline, but in a new section I labeled closure. I wasn't sure if forgiveness would ever come, but for the first time, I didn't feel pressured to offer it on demand. That same day, Miles stopped by with a new set of door sensors, extra security, he called it. I think he just wanted to check in. You look different, he said, screwing the last panel into place. Calmer. I think I'm finally learning the difference between alone and lonely, I said. He smiled. That's a good lesson. Most people don't learn it till it's too late. That evening, I joined Nora and her daughter at a community center event, something called Financial Wellness for Seniors. The irony made me laugh, but I went anyway. Halfway through, the speaker asked, "What's the most expensive thing you've ever paid for that didn't involve money?" I wrote on my notepad, "Approval," and under it, "Never again." Afterward, one of the organizers came up to me and asked if I'd be willing to share my story at the next meeting anonymously, if I preferred. I hesitated, but something in me said yes. Not because I wanted attention, but because silence is what people like Caleb count on. Silence is what keeps the next woman from realizing she's being drained under the name of love. Over the next few weeks, I started preparing. Not as a victim telling her pain, but as someone turning experience into warning. I even created a small handout, nothing fancy, titled The Family Incident Log, 10 Essentials. It listed things like dates, transfers, proof of pressure, phrases to document. Nora helped me design it, and Miles offered to print copies for free at the hardware store. When the night of the talk came, I was nervous, but as soon as I began speaking, something shifted. Faces in the audience nodded along. People gasped in the same places I used to choke up. And when I reached the part where I said, "Paper doesn't just protect money, it protects memory," the whole room went still. Afterward, a woman about my age came up, eyes glassy. "I thought I was the only one," she whispered. "You're not," I said. "And you're not crazy either." That night, I drove home with the windows down, letting the cool air wash over me. The house glowed warmly from the street, the kind of glow that used to feel lonely, but now just felt earned. I walked inside, set my binder on the shelf, and poured myself a glass of wine. I didn't toast to winning, I toasted to clarity. Because in the end, it wasn't the court or the law that gave me back my freedom, it was the moment I decided I was worth protecting, even if nobody else agreed. The next morning, I wrote a final note and taped it under the one that had gotten me through the worst days. Boundaries aren't revenge, they're repair. Then, for the first time in years, I stepped outside not to check who was watching, not to make sure the locks held, but simply to feel the sun on my face. It's been 6 months since the hearing, and sometimes I still wake up expecting to feel that old knot of dread in my stomach, the one that used to tighten before every phone call, every knock at the door. But it's gone now. In its place is something quieter, steadier. Peace has a sound, I've learned. It's the hum of your own house when no one's taking from it. Life didn't suddenly turn into sunshine and daisies after the verdict. Healing was slower, more practical than poetic. I had to relearn things: how to trust my own judgment, how to spend money on myself without guilt, how to stop waiting for an apology that might never come. One of the first things I did was sell the old house. Not out of bitterness, but because it held too many ghosts of generosity gone wrong. I used the proceeds to buy a small apartment downtown, a third-floor walk-up with a view of the park, and a coffee shop downstairs that smells like cinnamon and rain. The first night I slept there, I didn't dream about confrontation or fear. I just slept. Nora calls it my second act. She visits every Friday, bringing plants I don't need but always end up keeping. Miles still checks in sometimes, usually under the pretense of fixing something that isn't broken. And Diane, ever the professional, sends a Christmas card that says, "You were one of the rare ones who actually fought back." But the biggest change is inside me. I don't rush to explain myself anymore. I don't negotiate my peace. When people say, "You're so strong," I just smile, because strength wasn't what saved me, clarity did. The kind that only comes after you've watched everything you thought was love collapse under its own weight. A few weeks ago, I received another letter from Caleb. This one was longer. Apologies, explanations, lines about therapy and regret. I read it slowly, tracing each word with my thumb. And when I finished, I didn't cry. I just folded it neatly and placed it in the closure section of the binder. Some wounds don't need reopening to heal. Brianna didn't write, but I heard through a mutual friend that they've both found jobs, real ones this time. Maybe this whole ordeal forced them to grow up. Maybe it didn't. Either way, it's not my story to fix anymore. Last month, the community center asked me to lead a new workshop. Boundaries and balance. Protecting yourself without losing your heart. I almost said no. The old me would have worried about being too visible, too opinionated. But then I remembered how alone I had felt, how ashamed, and I said yes. The first session, 20 women showed up. Some were older, some my age, one even younger than Caleb. Their stories sounded different but felt the same, people giving until they disappeared. We talked, we cried, we laughed, and at the end, I gave them a small card with a line printed in simple black ink. The boundary is not what you say to them, it's what you promise yourself. One woman held the card to her chest and whispered, "I needed that." I smiled. "So did I told her. These days, I wake up early and walk to the park before the city fully stirs. I watch the sun rise through the trees and think about how strange it is to start over at 71. But starting over isn't always a reset, it's a return. A return to the version of yourself that existed before the begging, before the guilt, before the endless yes. Sometimes I still think about the house, the kitchen table, the nights I cried over their messages. but I don't feel anger anymore. Just gratitude that I finally learned the lesson I was supposed to, that saying no isn't cruel, and saving yourself doesn't mean you've stopped loving others. It means you've remembered to love yourself too. I keep the binder on a shelf near my desk. It's no longer a shield, it's a reminder of what I survived, of what I rebuilt, of what no one gets to take from me again. Before bed each night, I open the window and let the city sounds drift in buses, laughter, the faint strum of someone's guitar. It's messy, imperfect, alive, and in that noise, I hear it clearly now, the soft, steady rhythm of my own freedom. Boundaries aren't revenge, they're repair. That's the truth Evelyn learned the hard way, and maybe the truth someone watching this needs to hear tonight. Boundaries aren't about shutting people out, they're about keeping yourself safe inside. They're not punishment, they're maintenance. If you've ever felt guilty for saying no, remember this. Love without respect isn't love, it's leverage. You don't need permission to protect your peace. You just need proof that your worth doesn't depend on being needed. Here's what you can do right now. 1. Write down 3 clear boundaries that matter to you, not for others, but for yourself. Start your own incident log. 1 page where you note dates, texts, or moments that made you doubt your reality. It's not paranoia, it's data. 3. Practice Evelyn's 3C rule. Calm, collect. Confirm any time someone pressures you to sign, agree, or rush. This is not legal advice. 4. Choose one trusted person, a friend, a neighbor, a counselor, and share your story, not to justify, but to be witnessed. 5. At the end of the day, ask, what did I protect today that no one else could? That's how repair begins, one boundary, one choice, one quiet no at a time. The key Evelyn once gave away became her symbol of freedom. Yours might be a journal, a password change, or simply the decision to stop apologizing. If this story resonated with you, share it or leave a comment with one boundary you're reclaiming. You can also download the free Family Incident Log checklist in the description to help you start documenting your peace. Tonight, may you rest easy behind the boundaries you chose, not the ones others built for you.